There's a beautiful quote from Cristina Garcia's book, Dreaming in Cuban. It goes like this. Last fall, the line at the hardware store snaked around the block for the surplus paint left over from a hospital project on the other side of Havana. Felicia bought the maximum amount allowed, 8 gallons, and spent 2 Sundays painting the house with borrowed brushes and ladders. After all, she said, you could die waiting for the right shade of blue. The quote makes me remember my first trip to Cuba in 1997. Then, sitting on the Malecon, looking outward toward the distant coast of Florida, the water was a perfect shade of blue, just the color that it must have been when Cubans began their struggle for independence from Spain in 1895. At that time, as colonial forces destroyed houses and fields in the countryside, hundreds of thousands of refugees poured into the cities, cheered by the sight of homes and shops painted a bright color of Cuban blue, a tint symbolic of Cuba Libre. Havana, 5 times larger than Cuba's second largest city, Santiago de Cuba, was especially colorful and welcoming. After all, the capital was accustomed to newcomers. Its demographic growth was consistently fed by a seasonal influx of out-of-work peasants from the hinterlands, as well as by immigrants from abroad who were predominantly Spanish, French, and African in origin. This time, though, the arrivals were different. Havana's sense of well-being evaporated when the Spanish military appropriated urbanized areas of the island, forcing Cuban troops to retreat to an increasingly empty countryside. Havana's residents were further marginalized when the United States intervened, proclaiming that its business interests were in grave jeopardy. Soon the Cuban War of Independence became the Spanish-American War, ending in American military occupation of the island from 1898 to 1902. Needless to say, even during the years associated with the American occupation, all was not bleak. Commercial prosperity and United States influence led to construction activity that altered the form of the city in a good way, like the design of the Malecon. This is the famous waterfront boulevard where the monument to the victims of the Maine now finds its home. During these years, building projects had a beginning and an end, and every homeowner or shopkeeper had access to paint pigmented the perfect shade of blue. The Malecon became known for its grandeur and for its vividly painted facades. Compare this with today's overcrowding and decay, as over time, like in most cities, the good and the bad have been juxtaposed. As Havana grew, it became home to both the privileged and the downtrodden, reflecting both Las Vegas-style glamour and the struggle of hard-working residents. Social divisions were exacerbated by geographic divisions. The older and more densely populated eastern sectors of the capital became separated from the more affluent western suburban areas by the Almendares River, which flowed into the waves crashing into the Malecon. Here, ocean-watching voyeurs stared at the licit and illicit activities enlivening the city's acclaimed public space. In contrast, later dreamers would imagine a desperate escape over perfectly hued blue waters to an inadequate and unfamiliar clone, Miami's Little Havana, only 90 miles or so away. Today, Cuban blue brings to mind images of those who left and those who stayed, and it is a perfect reminder of the conflict between capitalism and socialism, which is shaping Havana's future. In the present-day capital, Cuba's Cold War legacy, the absence of Soviet patronage, and the presence of an American embargo has led to a struggle to preserve the successes of a revolution which was, in part, a reaction to an intrusive American presence, and in part, an enactment of nationalist mythology. In spite of the many challenges, newcomers hope that they can hold on to some of the redistributional gains of the last 50 years, gains which they now believe to be their entitlement. As migrants construct shelter from tin, cardboard, and other found material, many hope for the advantages of an increasing capitalist presence within Cuba. They especially long for abundant supplies of blue paint, one of the fantasized benefits of an American presence. At the same time, they insist on retaining revolutionary rewards. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you'd like more information on the history and politics of Cuba, please visit us at www.havanaproject.com.